Hi, my name's Daniel Foley Carter, and today I thought I'd put together a video just to help people with crawled, currently not indexed, which is effectively Google crawling pages on your site and not indexing them because they're of little to no value. So I often go on about this in the SEO world because the thing is that when you look at what Google's doing when it comes to crawling websites and when it comes to indexing content or not indexing content, the way that we have to look at this is if you imagine your website was 100 pages, okay? So you've got a 100-page website. If your index is 40 pages, let's say Google's indexed 40 pages and 60 pages aren't indexed, then that means that a majority of your index is not indexed. A majority of your website's index is not indexed. Okay, so we can think of it in an element of proportionality. If your overall site has a large volume of URLs that are available to index that aren't indexed, paints a negative picture of your domain. Effectively, what we want to make sure is that our website only consists of content that is of value. That's one of the reasons why content calls are so important for content that's dead or practically dead. That's why it's absolutely essential to ensure pages in your navigation, key pages throughout your user route, are all indexed and adding value to your overall index. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to show you something that you can do, which is pretty quick and easy. Now, one thing that's really important to understand is that because Google gives you sample data, the way that you have to look at this is that in your sample data, you have to try and look at what is the majority of that sample data. Is it dynamic URLs? Is it URLs that are actually 404, but Google's not updated or recrawled them and therefore they've stayed in crawl currently not indexed? The thing is that with a lot of these things is that you have to address the problem, you have to leave it, and then you have to come back and monitor it. So if you've got 50,000, 100,000 pages in crawl currently not indexed, you're only going to get a sample of 1,000 that you need to look at, and you need to break that down to start understanding what is what. And that's the purpose of this video today. So what you would typically expect to do is export from within Search Console your first 1,000 results into a Google Sheet. So we'll take our first 1,000 URLs. Now, depending on how you do SEO, you may have a master sheet. It could be any other way. What you're going to need for the purpose of this is you will need to do a site crawl using a tool such as Screaming Frog's SEO Spider or Xenu, or an online tool that allows you to export all of URLs with HTTP status, no index, canonical status, and whatnot. So for the purpose of this sheet, what I have in here is I have a full website crawl from Screaming Frog's SEO Spider. So I've dumped out all of the URLs in here, and I've frozen the columns, so I've got everything in here. You will need this, okay? Ideally, you would actually export as close to what I've got using Screaming Frog. If you do export using another tool, then you'll have to, later in this video when I do VLOOKUP, you'll have to adjust your columns accordingly. So I've actually already started doing it here, but I'm going to start again for the purpose of making this easier for people to repeat. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to paste in here, and I'm going to do what some people hate, and that's use the quicksand font. I love it. I'm going to freeze the top row, and also because I'm a formatting person, I'm going to change the formatting of our header row. Okay, so we've got our first 1,000 URLs. Now, the first thing that we should do is rule out URLs by status code. So there are always anomalies in Search Console where Google will bundle something as crawled currently not indexed, and then it will turn out to either be a URL that at the time it was crawled, it was HTTP 200, and now might be a 404 or 301. So what we're going to want to do with that is, firstly, we're going to select the whole column. We're going to freeze one column. Okay, so we've frozen our header row and we've frozen our column. So what we're now going to need to do is, let's do a HTTP status check. Now, one really important thing here is that when you do a HTTP status check, you need to have a Chrome profile for the Search Console profile that you're using. Otherwise, this won't work. Okay, so effectively, what we're going to do, let's just pretend this is our sheet. To get our status check, we copy our URLs and effectively we paste them. Okay. Then what we're going to do is use equals HTTP status code, and we're going to select our URL. Okay. Now, you won't be able to do equals HTTP status code unless you use this specific script. I'm not sure, I haven't saved it. Okay, so we've got HTTP status code here. Once you've added that script, you'll then be able to use this command. So we then will double tap to get the HTTP status for all of the URLs. And this is good because you can get HTTP status at the time. So rather than doing this, you might have done a crawl a day, a week ago. You can get the active HTTP status now for all URLs using this method. Now and again, you might get some exceptions if you've got malformed URLs, which can be addressed by changing the formatting. Okay, so we let that run. Depending on whether or not your site's got a CDN or some form of crawl request limitations, it may take a little while, a couple of minutes to run and get all of the HTTP status codes. Now, when that's done, you would just select the whole column, copy it, and paste it here. But I've already done this earlier, so I'm just going to pretend that I've copied it here. Okay. So what we then should do, so let's, I'm just going to call this CCNI, so call currently not indexed, main unfiltered list. Okay, and the reason that we're doing this is because if we're trying to segment our URLs, we want to understand exactly what the composition is. Okay, so for example, we're going to build out the sheet now, but then after we can segment the sheet by 404, by no index, and then obviously we can exclude those if we know that the URLs are no longer active. Now, what we can do is we can put a VLOOKUP against this. Now, before we do anything else, select everything, and then what you want to do is click Data, Create a Filter. Okay. What this will allow us to do is add filters. I just realised it's not got the full list in here, but that doesn't matter. Okay. Now, the next thing that we can start looking at doing is we can compare those URLs to our crawl. Okay, so what I'm going to do, just to save me having to do this again, I'm going to copy the VLOOKUP and I'll share this code with you. So the first thing that we want to compare our crawled currently not indexed URLs with is indexability. Okay, now if you remember earlier, I showed you the full Screaming Frog SEO Spider export. but you can do it with any export. Obviously, what we're going to be looking for is indexability status. Okay. Now, if we use a VLOOKUP, what we can do is we're going to be looking against column A, row 2. And then what we're going to be looking at is the full website crawl tab. Okay. And then we're going to be looking across the same range. And then what we're going to be doing, and do forgive me, I will have to put my glasses on for this. Primarily because in a lot of videos I get away with not wearing glasses. I try to pretend that I'm not getting older, but I am. Okay, so effectively, the easiest way that we can do this is if we duplicate it, so we can go to the other tab. Just move this out of the way. So if we go to the other tab, we can start looking at where we get our data from. Okay, so what we want to understand is the URLs that are in crawl currently not indexed. We want to understand, well, are they non-indexable? Are they blocked? You know, do they have a canonical parent? Because then that way we can start filtering URLs that are in crawl currently not indexed to work out, well, should something be in there, or is something in there, you know, because it's been blocked and Google's reclassified it, or there's lots of different reasons. But you know, this is how we filter down the data. So the first thing that we're going to want to look at is indexability. Okay, so we can see here it's in column C. Okay, so we've got A2 and then column C all the way up to the end of the range. Okay, and then obviously number 3 for the third row. So what this will do is it will look to see if there is a match for the URL. Okay, this isn't a full export, this is just a sample of the data. Okay, so we can see here that some of the URLs are indexable, but some are not. And you can always cross-check this by copying a URL and then having a look to see if it's in the list. Obviously, this is a live crawl, or this was a crawl, and what's in crawl currently not indexed could be a legacy URL. So if it's a legacy URL, it's not going to appear in the crawl, and there won't be any data for indexability. So what we can also look at is we can also look at both status and we can look at indexability status. Okay, so we can include those. Okay, so we can look at whether or not something has been blocked, whether or not something has been redirected. So we can use columns E and F. Okay, and then what we can do is we can copy our VLOOKUP. So let's change that to 5. And we can also see if there is any statuses. Okay, so we can see if they have any. So we're already starting to see that there are a lot of URLs here that are throwing HTTP 200, but they're not in the crawl. Okay. And then the same for column F. And we drop it all the way down. And I get the feeling that we're just going to get the same pattern over and over again. Oh no, not this time. Okay. So effectively, what we're starting to be able to see is that we've got a load of URLs here that return a HTTP 200. So they are active. But they're not a part of the crawl. Okay. So if these sites, if these URLs are returned, but they're not part of a crawl, then typically we could expect them to be orphaned. And they might be orphaned because, you know, they could be dynamic URLs that at one point were accessible via an internal link, or Googlebot triggered it during a crawl. And then obviously now, if it's not a part of the site crawl, then Google is still seeing that, well, hold on a second, these pages are active, but they're not linked to from anywhere. They're orphaned. So clearly they're of no value. Therefore, we're not going to index them. Okay. So being able to do this, and last but not least, obviously, it's unlikely that, you know, with most of these empty, we can then look for the canonical path to see if there is one. So we're looking at Z. So we can then that. Okay, and then you can call it whatever you want, canonical path. Okay, now you can test this. Okay, so if, for example, we take the home page and we put that in there, the lead row, you can see here that we've got the indexability status. Yeah, so you need to make sure that the number corresponds against the column number, okay, to make sure that we get the canonical path. So it should be 25. Hold on. Oh, that doesn't help. You also need to make sure that as you change these across the rows, so A2 for website crawl. Sorry. I'm not having much luck with this. Sorry, I'll get there eventually. So, sorry, so we're looking at A2 against the full site crawl against A2 against Z. Right, that looks more like it. A against Z. I'm not having much luck at all with it. There we go. Right, finally got there. Doesn't exactly make me look good when I when I tumble over my own VLOOKUPs. Okay. So always remember, again, VLOOKUP and anything like that, when you copy across columns, it will change the first lookup reference. So you need to just make sure that that's kept consistent. So whenever you're comparing a path, just always make sure that these align, and then make sure that this is the range, and then that follows the column number, so that then it's got the column number to look up against. So there we go. So now if we roll that down, we should see, so we can see here that there are canonical paths here. Okay. Now, all that aside, okay, what we can then do is we know that if these URLs are not present, if there isn't any data for them, okay, and they're not in the crawl, what we can do is we can do two things, okay? So the first one is that we can separate out anything that is parameter driven, okay? So we might have a parameter driven path here where the parameter path is a child canonical, okay? So let's pretend right now we've done that, and I'm just going to make sure that these ones are done as well. Right, so we've got A2, E, 5, that's fine. Right, and then we've got F, which should be 6. Okay. Now, what we can then do is we can start filtering. Okay, so the first one is that we can filter down to HTTP 100 first. Okay, so then what we're going to do, we're going to select that. There's two ways of doing it. You can just deselect and leave HTTP 200 selected, or you can filter by condition text contains 200. Either way works. Okay, so now we've only got HTTP 200 URLs. We don't have anything else. Okay, then the next thing that we can do is duplicate again, and then we can say, right, so how many of those are static URLs? We can then use this, filter by condition, text does not contain, and then use equals. You can't use a question mark in text does not contain, but you can use custom formulas. So you can use a custom formula if you want to exclude multiple parts of a parameter, but generally most parameters will all contain an equals. So you can do that. Okay. Now what we've got is a list of URLs that we know are static. Okay, so they're not dynamically driven, or they could be dynamically driven with no canonical parent URL. There's lots of different situations. But the whole point in drilling down is we want to understand what the composition of URLs are so that we can then take action. Okay. So, you know, we get down to our static URLs. Now, if we've done our VLOOKUP against the Screaming Frog crawl, and you know, and we've got no data for these URLs, okay, and you can randomly pick them out just to double check. Okay. If those URLs aren't anywhere and they're HTTP 200, then it's orphaned. So this is orphaned. It's not linked to anywhere from in the website. It doesn't have a canonical path. Oh, it does have it has a self-referencing canonical here, but it isn't in the crawl data. Okay, so immediately, once you start understanding if something is active and it's not a part of a site crawl, obviously it's not indexed because it's in crawl currently not indexed. We have to understand, why is the page orphaned? Is it, did it have dynamic origin? Did it have layered URLs? What are the reasons behind? Now, obviously, with this as well is that, this is pretty poor example because there isn't hardly anything here. But what we could do is we could do static indexable. And then we could just change this to say filter by condition, or we could select this. Okay, so in this example, we could just untick that, and then we would have indexable. Okay, then we could have non-indexable. Okay, and then obviously we can do it the other way around. Okay, then we get to the point of, okay, well, are there any internal links? If there are no internal links to these pages, were these pages historically used and then obviously they're no longer used? Were they created dynamically? So we have to rule all of these things out so that we can say, okay, well, look, do they have any pre-existing Search Console data? So in the last 16 months, were they generating any clicks? Okay. And what we can also do is we can export using Search Analytics for Sheets. We can do a full dump of this data, and then in another sheet, okay, we could do clicks, impressions, and then we could do a VLOOKUP against the click sheet, and the same with impressions to see, you know, was there any historic data for these URLs? Okay, that will then allow you to really start segmenting down what your composition of crawl currently not indexed is. Now, whenever I'm doing these exercises, I do a really heavy drill down on crawl currently not indexed, discovered not currently indexed. And it's really important to understand. It's important to segment out orphaned URLs. For example, if you've got loads of orphaned URLs, they're not part of the site crawl, they don't have any history in the last 16 months, then you'd either renovate them if they had potential based upon what they were, or you would completely cull them. Okay. Now, there are other things as well. So here's something that I do during my behemoth audits. What I would typically do is export Google Analytics data into a Google Sheet, and I would also do a VLOOKUP against these URLs for traffic data. So I'd be looking to say, okay, well, we might not have any organic data here, but is there traffic to these pages full stop? Is there traffic from Quora, traffic from Reddit, traffic from Facebook, traffic from Instagram, LinkedIn? So we might find that, okay, well, these don't do anything from an SEO perspective, but actually people somehow manage to navigate to them dynamically. Maybe they could be behind some JavaScript filtering, so the pages are there, but they're not accessible. There's lots of different scenarios that we always must factor out. Now, what we can deduce from this is that the majority of what the URLs in here are far more likely, i.e. if you had hundreds of dynamic URLs, let's say 800 of 1,000 URLs in this list were parameter driven, then you could probably speculate that, you know, if you've only got 1,000 or 30,000 URLs, that a large portion of that 30,000 URLs are going to be of similar composition to this. So if you segment the top 1,000 URLs and then you address those, you might add to robots text, you might add a blanket disallow to exclude certain parameters. Once you've implemented that, then what you do is you leave it a couple of weeks and then you go back to crawl currently not indexed, and what you should expect to see is a decline, and that decline might be pretty steep, because if a large portion of the URLs that you couldn't export were parameter driven and you've implemented that in robots text, that will have a big impact. So you should see that come down a lot. So this is a really good way to identify and, you know, cross-reference. And you can even take an XML sitemap. You can strip all the URLs out of that sitemap and you can put it into another sheet, and then you could do a VLOOKUP against the sitemap URLs to see, you know, are these in the sitemap but not on the site crawl? And that's another thing that happens. So with a lot of sites that I audit, they will have content that is effectively orphaned because it's not discoverable through the site, but it's in the sitemap. So they've got an auto-generating plugin that generates a sitemap based upon everything that's on the domain. But the actual crawl infrastructure of the site doesn't support that. So what happens? The page appears orphaned to Google, and if the page appears orphaned, well, it can't be of value to the end user if it's nearly orphaned. We'll put it in crawl currently not indexed. Okay, so make a process like this your friends to identify, you know, what things are orphaned, what things might have a canonical configuration issue. But the end result is that you should be working to reduce crawl currently not indexed and discover not currently indexed, because what you want your site to be is a tight index of value content. You do not want a large index with tons of dead URLs, ultra low impression, loads of URLs in crawl currently not indexed, because if you look at your overall index composition and it's far in favor of weak, dead, non-indexed content, then you're going to have a problem. And it's something that I advocate people to obviously to address. I hope you found this useful, and there will be lots more video content to come and upcoming webinars. Have a nice day.